Welcome to R&R Living Life. In this episode, we make our way back towards the Sedan Dip Road to Fort Constantine and on to Cloncurry, where we stop and spend some time revisiting old haunts and doing some odd jobs around town, before continuing on to McKinley, Kynuna and Longreach. After spending time reminiscing about our younger years at Quamby, Rick and I made our way to Fort Constantine to cross the Cloncurry River and make our way back to Cloncurry. It was stunning to see all the gidgee, gums and bloodwood trees that were in full bloom. Fort Constantine is part of Stanbroke Pastoral Company and today is very different from what it was 30 years ago when it was owned by AMP Limited. AMP Stanbroke Pastoral Company was established in 1964, once owning 27 cattle stations in Queensland and the Northern Territory, controlling some 1,160,000 square kilometres of pastoral country. In 2004, the company was purchased by the Nebo Group, the sale being the largest rural transaction in Australia's history and included approximately 5 million head of cattle. Unfortunately, the Nebo Group fell apart later the same year, with one major player buying out his fellow investors and then selling all but 6 Gulf country stations, one being Fort Constantine, with Stanbroke now a family-owned company. During the 70s and 80s, bullocks were walked to the railhead at Cloncurry from the ford across the Cloncurry River, past Mount Marathon and onto the town common, before being loaded onto the rail. Rick had many a story to tell of his days working at the fort in the late 1970s. Back then the fort was a great breeding and fattening block, while today it runs around 15,000 head including a stud and commercial breeding herd and a backgrounding operation. From the fort we took the link road across the Cloncurry River, passing a 10-metre flood sign hidden in the grass quite some distance before we made the main channel. The river, with its beautiful weeping eucalyptus trees, is home to a variety of wildlife and certainly not a truck stuck in the riverbed. The river still had some waterholes with a very large expanse of sand. We passed over a couple of smaller channels before passing Mount Fort Constantine, measuring 179 metres, an outcropping ridge of sharp angular fragments of stone, red rock and magnemite altered. Mount Fort Constantine volcanics is the closest exposure to and the same rocks that host the ore at Ernest Henry Mine, just over 10 kilometres away, and looks more like a small hill, not a mountain. Further along we passed the Ernest Henry Mine in the distance, a large iron ore copper gold mine about 40 kilometres northeast of Cloncurry. Commercial operations at the site began as an open-cut mine in 1998, with underground mining beginning in 2009. A 1,000-metre housing shaft brings ore to the surface with traditional grinding and flotation methods in the concentrator used to extract copper and gold. In March 2023, the mine was closed for 6 weeks after floodwaters entered the site. About 20 kilometres from the Curry, we turned onto the road to Ernest Henry that would take us back into Cloncurry. The vast expanse of fertile, cleared open country was covered in lush, rich pasture of flinders and Mitchell grasses in the paddocks, making it prime grazing country. Back in town we stopped to check out some of the old haunts that Rick frequented in his younger years and pick up some groceries and morning tea. We checked out the Post Office Hotel, originally a single-storey structure known as the Union, before becoming the Post Office Hotel in 1901. In 1907, a new owner contracted a timber merchant to design and build a new and modern double-storey structure, and on completion in 1908 was described as one of the finest two-storey wooden hotels in northern Queensland. In June 1914 the building was burnt down along with adjoining shops, with another fire claiming the building in 1932. The hotel, as it stands today, is the fourth in succession on this site. Lemon's store is an iconic Cloncurry store visited by many a jackaroo and jillaroo looking for gear including clothing, camping, hunting, gift lines, footwear, and various other items that are required in the outback. The store has been supplying the outback since 1947 and has a massive range of quality products. On our way out of town, we stopped at the Comet B patent windmill, the first of only 15 of these windmills ever made by Sydney Williams & Co. between 1915 and 1943. Originally raised at Oban Station, 100 kilometres southwest of Mount Isa, before being moved to Eddysborough on Ardmore Station in 1981, operating at a depth of 130 metres and with 910 litres per hour flow rate. The Daniels family commissioned OEM Comet windmills in 2021-22 to refurbish it, with the windmill being installed at Mary Kathleen Memorial Park in September 2022. The windmill is a fine example of a reliable and easily maintained water recovery system used throughout Australia to bring water from the Great Artesian Basin. After spending time in Cloncurry, we stopped at a truck stop not far up the highway and had lunch. Further on, we turned onto the Landsborough Highway, also part of Matilda Way, and made our way to McKinley. I can remember driving along this stretch of the road before it was bitumen, and you had to choose which track you were to take because of all the deep bull dust. It was an interesting track back then, even having to pull out a bog car on one trip. We stopped in McKinley to stretch our legs and to check out the Walkabout Creek Hotel, now on the highway. Rick and I had once checked it out many years ago when it was originally further off the highway on Middleton Street. Situated 104 kilometres southeast of Cloncurry, McKinley is a small town steeped in history and outback charm. It takes its name from the McKinley River, discovered by explorer John McKinley, who led the South Australian Burke Relief Expedition in 1861 during the search for Burke and Wills. Established over a century ago, McKinley served as a vital staging post for Cobb and Co coaches and a social hub for graziers from surrounding properties. Today, it offered us a glimpse into some of Australia's rich outback heritage. The Walkabout Creek Hotel was originally built as the Federal Hotel in 1900 and gained international fame as an iconic pub used as a key filming location for the movie Crocodile Dundee. In the aftermath of Cyclone Kirrily in January 2024, the McKinley River at the hotel rose 1.7 metres above the Landsborough Highway, closing the road. We had been in the same position over 30 years ago, having to wait in Winton for the floodwaters to recede, before being the first vehicle allowed through to Cloncurry. The highway had been washed away to a single lane in many places along the way, and only for the fact that we were being airlifted out of Cloncurry were we allowed along the road. At that time there were around 200 semi-trailers stuck in Cloncurry. Oh, the joys of the wet season. It is interesting to note that silver supplied for the medals at the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games and the 2008 Beijing Olympics was mined at Carrington South 32 mine, located 87 kilometres south of McKinley. McKinley has a fascinating past, full of history for the enthusiast or film buff, and was a great place to stop. From McKinley, we continued along the Matilda Highway to Kynuna on the banks of the Diamantina, arriving just on 3 o'clock and parking up in the caravan park. Later that afternoon, we went for a walk down to the Blue Heeler Hotel, built in 1889, and back, enjoying the brolgas that frequented the area. Little has changed in its 135-year history. In the 1860s, it was a staging post for Cobb and Co. Sadly, in 2024, when about 400 millimetres of rain fell in the aftermath of Cyclone Kirrily, the historic hotel was inundated with 130 centimetres of water. It took months of intensive clean-up efforts, fundraising and extra trips carting cattle and a lot of money before the Blue Heeler could reopen for business. You really do need stamina, persistence, and a continual fighting spirit to live where you choose in outback Australia. Floods, drought, bushfires, flies, and other pests, and ignorance are just some of the hurdles faced every day when you live in rural Australia. Once back at Gidget, we enjoyed a stunning sunset, something you can't beat. Kynuna was established in the 1860s as a shearers' union camp at a supply point for the nearby Kynuna Pastoral Station, and where 5 roads meet the Diamantina River, with the town being gazetted in 1894. In its early days, the town had a population of around 700 people, boasted 3 hotels, as well as being a staging post for Cobb and Co coaches. 16 kilometres east of Kynuna is Quamby Waterhole Conservation Park, with the overshot dams built by Chinese labourers in 1883 and are said to be technical masterpieces. The precision of the work and the technical excellence means they have survived to this day. The Quamby Waterhole is also a famous link with Banjo Paterson and the Waltzing Matilda poem. Folklore has it that Bob McPherson, owner of Dagworth Station, told Banjo the story of the suicide of Samuel Hoffmeister upstream of the Diamantina River beside the Quamby Waterhole in September 1894. Hoffmeister had reportedly been one of the striking shearers involved in the burning down of the Dagworth woolshed. There is so much history and interesting facts in these outback towns. So much of it goes unnoticed unless you stop and wander around the area. We had passed through the area on many occasions years ago, so it was just nice to stop and soak up some of the allure of those early days. I had been trying to photograph a plain turkey, one of Australia's largest birds, growing to an average size of about 1 metre, in many places on this trip. But for some reason I kept missing them. Today was my lucky day to catch one, but it was very well camouflaged. These ground-dwelling birds are found on the dry plains, grasslands and open woodlands, and are becoming increasingly rare or extinct in some regions. With all the feed around and the abundance of waterholes, seeing native animals was difficult. We did see the odd kangaroo, emu and brolga, but not to the extent we had previously seen them on our travels. From Kynuna we made our way 165 kilometres further south-east to Winton, through vast blue skies and wide open downs country. The closer to Winton we got, jump-ups or mesas, where erosion had created narrow channels and rifts through the rock, appeared in this predominantly flat semi-arid land. We had stopped at Cawnpore Lookout to view the Lilyvale Hills on the western side of Winton on our return journey from Inaminka and southwestern Queensland last year, and I think we were seeing some of the outlying mesas that were not part of the Lilyvale Hills, though not as massive, but still just as amazing. We had been travelling through the Winton Shire that covers an area of 53,935 square kilometres and has a population of a mere 1,600 people. The town is the service centre of an important cattle and sheep raising region across predominantly flat semi-arid land known as the Channel Country. As we had stopped in Winton last year for a couple of days, we were happy to refuel and continue on our way. There were so many vehicles and caravans that had we wanted to stay, there was no room at the inn, as the saying goes, let alone anywhere to park in town. Winton's rich history has links to Waltzing Matilda and Qantas, but today the town is almost as well known for something far more ancient: dinosaurs. Winton's first official dinosaur discovery was a fossilised footprint found on Cork Station in 1962. About 20 kilometres from Winton we passed the turn-off to the Australian Age of Dinosaurs that we had visited last year. Well worth the trip if you are interested in dinosaurs, and on through open downs country. The grass was so high in places it was difficult to see the cattle, let alone the sheep grazing. This was one of the long, flat stretches of outback roads in Queensland, about 180 kilometres between Winton and Longreach, but Rick and I always find something interesting to see along the way. From the flock of small brown eagles to brolgas and emus on the other side of the railway line, or the roly-poly or prickly saltwort, also known as tumbleweed, a native weed species that had been blown up against the fences. The dead, mobile tumbleweeds can become a significant fire hazard, particularly when too many plants pile up against fences or buildings. We entered the Cooper Creek catchment that flows into the Lake Eyre Basin, that covers just under 1/6 of all Australia, with the Lake Eyre Basin more than 5 times the size of Victoria. It is the largest internally drainage basin that normally retains water and allows no outflow to other external bodies of water like rivers or oceans. Instead, the water flows into permanent and seasonal lakes and swamps, covering about 1,200,000 square kilometres, including much of inland Queensland, a large portion of South Australia and the Northern Territory, and a part of western New South Wales. The Lake Eyre Basin of rainwater to a great extent geographically overlaps the Great Artesian Basin underground. The basin began as a sinking landmass, mostly covered by forest and containing many more lakes than now. The climate has changed from wet to arid over the last 60 million years. Most of the rivers in the Lake Eyre Basin are now slow-flowing, flat and completely dry for lengthy periods. When the country north of the basin floods, floodwaters drain via the main rivers of the basin, the Cooper Creek, Georgina River and Diamantina River, southwards towards Lake Eyre, the country's lowest point at 16 metres below sea level. The water overflows the creek banks across the floodplains, filling waterholes and wetlands and carving new channels, giving rise to the name Channel Country. Most of the rain which falls in the north never reaches the lake 1,000 kilometres away, which only fills occasionally. The Channel Country and waterholes are home to millions of breeding birds after rain. This fragile environment is under threat by natural extremes of drought and flood, making the basin vulnerable to wind and water erosion, which is often exacerbated by poor land management. Rick and I will leave you enjoying the roosters that frequent the Apex Riverside Free Camp on the banks of the Longreach Waterhole. I hope you have enjoyed this episode as we travel through Western Queensland. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Join us next time as we explore Aramac and the Lake Dunn Sculpture Trail and continue on to Jericho and Alpha. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, Livin' Life.